to, we will respond. We will respond to you. And if you want to just jot down even like something to remember about the slide, that you might have a question about a slide, feel free to do that. And Bree had also suggested yesterday you can put your questions in the chat, but we won't look at it until after we're finished. Okay, take it away, Ashley.
All right, thank you. So today we're going to be discussing the TFCBT work that we've done with children who have been exposed to violence. My name is Ashley Prousbeard, and I have my lovely colleagues, Dr. Martika Bacalhau
Yeah, that's
and
cool.
Brianna Dedu, here with us presenting as well. If you ladies would just say hey, and welcome again, everybody.
Hello.
All right.
You go first, Bree. Go first, Bree.
Hi, I am Bree. I am one of the presenters with Ashley and Dr. Martika.
Yes, and I'm Martika Bacalhau with VEEP. Thank you.
All right, so just to give you a background context to the work that we do, I'm going to provide a brief introduction to ACEs. ACEs, there's three realms of ACEs. You have household ACEs, you have environment ACEs, and you have community-based ACEs. So these are all things that our kiddos that we work with have been exposed to. Some example of household ACEs include emotional and sexual abuse, exposure to domestic violence, and parental mental illness. Some of those community-based ACEs include poverty, food scarcity, lack of jobs, and historical trauma. And then the environmental ACEs include the natural disasters like the hurricanes and the record flooding that we've had from a couple of years ago, as well as the pandemic. So now that we kind of have a background context of the problem, let's look at just some statistics involving youth. So there's been an ongoing study since 1991 using the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and that has shown that 76% of those kids that were followed had experienced at least one of those ACEs. 18% had experienced four or more. 60% of students had experienced emotional abuse. It's incredibly high. A third had experienced physical abuse during their lifetime. And 28% lived in a home affected by poor mental health. And in the communities that were affected more than others, experiencing the highest numbers of ACEs, included females, American Indian. Hold on one second.
I think I'm echoing. Can you just listen?
Included female populations, American Indian or Alaskan Native, multiracial, and LGBTQ plus individuals. And so now that we've looked at the prevalence of ACEs and these overall traumatic experiences of, youth that are living today, what are some things that, our kids that we in the aftermath of the trauma that they've endured, anger, a sense of helplessness and guilt, flashbacks related to PTSD, shame and numbness. And so we know that over time, some of these emotions can lessen in intensity, but other times the individual might need mental health treatment or medication management to help with symptoms. And so that's where we come in.
So we're going to look at one of the drawings that a child drew, and just to show you some of the adversities that happened here in Robeson County. This is a child who said during broad daylight, a burglar came into her house, and she ran through the back door, and there she is in the back there on her phone calling the police. Next slide. Another picture drawn by child in Robeson County. And this is just a picture of how the houses are boarded up. The parks, look at the picture of the swing set. There's like a chain, and that represents how the parks are closed off. And there's the child with a frown on, park closed. And then she wrote here, or they wrote, my community has been affected by gangs, drugs, and due to these unsafe things, parks are not open and houses are boarded up. Here again, we're looking at community violence. In my neighborhood, people burn down houses for no reason. It is scary to know that I live in a neighborhood where these types of crimes take place. That was a 7th grader in Robeson County. Here's a picture of bullying. And there's the bully is on your far left. And notice the victim with that circle of red, which was to represent anger, the black eye, and then there's a tear. There's also blood coming out of the character's nose. And there it's and wrote in big bold letters, hurt, hurts, hurts. Social pain has the same processing effect in the brain as physical pain. So when a child is bullied, even though no hands have been laid on that child, the brain still reacts as if the child has experienced physical pain. And stress responses, we know, were fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fawn, just to be clear, is a submission. It's a yielding to. It's a no boundaries, right? And the response from the hormones, hormones in the brain that are exerted during the stress response is cortisone and adrenaline.
Alrighty, here we have a quick overview of trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. It's an evidence-based treatment for the different types of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences that we talked about. And then we use a really easy acronym called PRACTICE, and that helps us remember the order of steps that we go through when it comes to trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And we're going to go into detail on each of these steps, which is listed here as psychoeducation, and that should say parenting instead of practice. I just wanted to write the acronym twice, I guess. Relaxation, affective modulation, cognitive coping, the trauma narrative, in vivo, conjoint sessions, and enhancing safety.
So that first module, as Bree mentioned, is going to include psychoeducation and parenting skills. So for the psychoeducation piece of things, you can take the results of the assessments that you've done with kiddos. So in our case, it's the revised children's anxiety and depression scale, as well as the UCLA PTSD reaction index. And you can take their responses to that and draw a connection to the different trauma responses as kind of like an introductory, this is why we're here, this is what you're experiencing, and this makes sense in the context of what you've experienced, right? So you move into introducing, again, the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. And you're bringing the parents abreast of all of this as well. So the parents can be at home connecting with the kiddos and reinforcing the information that's being learned. And it ultimately begins gradual exposure, because while the kid doesn't have to identify any specific details about the trauma that they've experienced, acknowledging that something has happened and working to manage the distress associated with even that can help lessen some of the avoidance symptoms that come with PTSD.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
During psychoeducation, you're also going to be introducing the TF-CBT components as a whole. So this is a beautiful just graphic that we received when we were all being trained that is a really, really good visual for showing the kid like where we're headed and the parents as well. And if you just notice the sequence there, it starts at the bottom of the little stair step with psychoeducation and parenting, and then moves through every one of the TF-CBT modules. And by the end of it, you have the kid exclaiming, "I'm free to be me," right? Because through treatment, they ultimately will be freed up by some of the trauma symptoms and the weight of that that's holding them down. So if you just can take a moment and tune into that and just notice the sequence of it. All right, next slide. So this was an example of a psychoeducation activity that I did virtually with a teenager. So I'd pull up the whiteboard on Zoom and we'd first identify, okay, I'd put trauma in the middle of the whiteboard, and then I'd start to ask for feedback as far as, okay, what do you believe trauma is? And so these were responses that the kid gave me. They identified, physical, sexual, emotional, psychological abuse, coercion, manipulation. This was an older teenager. Being separated from family, seeing a loved one get hurt violently or gruesomely. And so we started with identifying, okay, what is trauma? And then we move into breaking down what are the different trauma responses. So I put, fight. I start out with fight, and then we look at, okay, what would that look like in nature between animals? What would a fight response look like? Again, just trying to reinforce that we all have these responses and they're normal and natural. And then having the kid, once given the definition, suggest like different examples of the trauma response. So these are all examples that the kid gave me, the teenager gave me. For instance, fight was lashing out, the body feeling very tense and tight, physically fighting. Then we moved into flight, where he gave examples about anxiety, sweaty and shaky hands, sensing danger all around. As we moved into freeze, he identified shutting down, just not mentally being there, depression, blacking out. And then that fawn piece that Dr. Martika mentioned was in regards to, lack of boundaries, this idea of like people pleasing, not being able to say no. So after the kids have like come up with different examples of the trauma responses, then I have them put a star by which ones they feel like relates to them. So you're, from that ground level, just kind of continuing to build the awareness of, how has this thing that's happened to me impacted me in my day-to-day life.
So it's really important for caregivers to be active and participate in TFCBT. It's not always an option for some kiddos for their parent or guardian to be there, but that does not mean that you can't still go forward with TFCBT. If their caregiver or parent is participatory, then we see kids and teens improve more quickly in treatment, even if it's their foster parent or their guardian at the time, which is an aunt or uncle. So the counselor will help the caregiver learn how to model respect and other desired behavior. We're going to encourage them to be very consistent when it comes to the alternatives to physical punishment, showing up to therapy, and their communication with their kiddo. We want to really, really encourage them to validate their kids' feelings and praise them for showing wanted behavior. So using a lot of labeled praise. And then we like to remind the caregivers that not even though they know that their child is hurting and has gone through a trauma, the parent or caregiver is also going through a trauma. And so it's important for them to take care of themselves too. So then we go into relaxation. And for relaxation, we are going to explore kiddos' strengths to find the best relaxation technique for them. We want to create a plan that is very specific to the client's needs and triggers. We might use techniques and skills like grounding, which is physically connecting with the ground or the earth to self-soothe, or we could use mindfulness with focusing on the here and now. And we want to explain traumatic reminders, work to identify each client's triggers as well. So here are a couple of the techniques that we use with some of our kiddos. And the first one, the calm down with taking 5 breaths. You use your hand and you trace up each finger, which is a breath in. You pause at the top, and then you breathe out when you trace down your finger. And you go up and down every single finger. And then you recognize how you feel after. If you still feel very activated, you might have to go back through all 5 fingers, and that's okay. We have 2 hands. So I like to tell kids, if one hand isn't enough, oh, we got another one. If we need to break out a foot too, that's fine. So after that, one that I love to do for myself and with my kiddos is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique. And with this, we get to ground them and show them that they're here in the present by acknowledging all 5 of their senses. And so we go through 5 things that they can see and we get them to explain in detail. So like if I can't see what you're looking at, I want to be able to imagine what you're seeing. Then we go into 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. The last one is a little bit hard. If they don't have anything around them, I usually encourage them to give themselves 1 affirmation. Here's another couple examples. We have visualization. So the first one is a kiddo's happy place. And we all know what our happy place is. For me and Ashley, it is the beach. And so you think of your happy place, and then you go through all 5 of your senses again to really put yourself in that place. What you can see, hear, feel or touch, smell and taste, and how you're feeling. The next one is progressive muscle relaxation. And this goes through different parts, different muscle groups in your body. You're going to tense up those muscles and then relax them. So one really easy one that I like to show kids, especially when they're sitting in school, is focus on how your toes feel in your shoes right now. And then scrunch up those toes in your shoes and see what it feels like. Feel the arch of your foot raise off your shoe. And then relax and feel that relaxation go through your feet. And that one's a good one because nobody's going to see what your toes are doing when you're at school, unless you're not wearing tennis shoes.
All right, and so the next module is affect modulation. I love the placement of the relaxation module before this affective piece because those skills that Bree just went over are things that can be used once we're moving into this portion of the treatment where, you know, we start to identify, okay, what are some of the feelings that are associated with the tough experiences that we've had, right? So inevitably, if a kid starts to get activated because we're focusing on some of these tough, you know, feelings or emotions, then you can go right back into using some of those relaxation skills. So it really is a fine dance in between the modules of this treatment. So the affect modulation module focuses on emotion identification and regulation. You're working with the kids to build their feelings vocabulary and just ultimately their awareness of their internal world, right? Because I think I could speak for all of us when I say sometimes we're just kind of autopiloting throughout life. Our kiddos do that too, and we're not really tuned in at all to what's going on with our internal world. And there can be a lot of healing that comes from just tuning in to what's going on internally. So with our kids, we're working to strengthen that mind-body connection. So, you know, when having them identify a feeling, slowing things down and asking, does that feeling have a color? Does it have a temperature that goes with it? Is there a shape or a movement or a weight or a smell? And that can be just a way to get the kids to just slow down and to be. So these are some examples of virtual affect modulation activities I did with 2 different kids. So the pictures that look similar, the left picture and the one in the middle were from the same teenager, and then the one on the far right was from another teenager. The teenager I was working with the 2 pictures here, starting on the left, had lost a loved one. And they basically drew a sketch of themselves, identified different emotions that include anger, sadness, fakeness, and strength. So, and then they picked a color that matched that emotion, right? So in this case, the picture on the left, the anger was the color red. The highlighter yellow that you see a lot of was this feeling of fakeness, this feeling of being fake. There was some blue for sadness, and purple represented strength. So in this first picture, they drew this to represent how they felt after their loved one had just died. And you can see just this overarching sense of fakeness of having to put on like a smile that everything's okay when that really was not representing how they felt at that time. You can see that they noticed maybe a source of strength that was in their heart because it was something that they were having to go through. But you also see those pieces of kind of sadness. You even see anger, the idea of anger coming out of the kid's eyes, right? Which would make sense in the context of feeling like you have to just put on a happy-go-lucky smile when you're really hurting inside. And then the picture in the middle was done by the same kid, and it represented how they felt a couple of years after the loss had happened. They had been in therapy. You notice that that yellow fakeness feeling is not there. It's not in this drawing. You see a lot of the purple, the strength that the client felt within their body. You even see, I love the purple that's actually coming out of the kid's eyes, because the idea there was that, you know, there can be strength that comes from the expression of difficult and hard emotion. And so this was a really beautiful just way to capture, you know, the transition of the kid prior to therapy, and then throughout therapy and afterwards. And then the picture on the right was done with a different kiddo who had experienced emotional abuse and physical violence within his home. And this is really kind of a heart-wrenching just capture of him in this isolated space in his room with this big monster behind him saying all these really nasty and ugly things, which represented a family member that had been doing that to him. And when we were processing some of this, you know, again, what a just big expression of how he felt in that time. But by the time he had gotten into the therapy office with me, he was living in a different environment. And so he was able to look at this and he felt relieved that it was something that he didn't experience anymore. Where you're muted.
I am muted. The next portion of the TF-CBT process is the cognitive coping and processing section. So here, clients get to begin paying attention to their thoughts and understand that connection between their thoughts, their feelings, their behavior, and their bodily sensations. It's very important that we put in those bodily sensations, which is not included in a lot of the, like you just see a cognitive triangle instead of a cognitive diamond. But for kiddos, a lot of times they say like, oh, I don't know how I know when I'm angry, or I don't know how I know when I'm sad. But when you really help them tune in to those bodily sensations that they have, whether it's a tummy ache or tingling, or they feel their nails digging into their hands when they clench their fists, then it starts to clue them in on like, oh, I do have warning signs to when my anger is going to pop off, or when I'm going to go into like this really big sad episode. Here is, oh my gosh, I love these. So this is the What Are You Thinking team. And it's a lot of words, so I'm not going to read all of them. But if you just look up What Are You Thinking team, they come up. And these are the cognitive distortions that we think about and we hear a lot often, but it makes it in a way that's easier for kids to digest. So we have All or Nothing Alan. We got Shoulda Sharonda. We have Drama Queen Jean, and over Oliver, Negative Nate, Badmouth Brandy. And it sticks with kids and helps them understand those cognitive distortions more clearly.
So this was an example of a virtual cognitive coping activity I did with a teenager online. And it does have the cognitive triangle in it, not the diamond. But what I did try to do was have the kids identify when we were having feelings, like where they noticed that in their body. So I started out first with, okay, what are some negative thoughts that are associated with the trauma that you've been through? This kid said, you know, a question that they often ask themselves: was I a terrible son? This was a thought that they had. I'm a terrible son. And then we followed that through with, okay, the feelings that come with that include, you know, fear and sadness. That's what it was for him, and just that mixture. And then how that led to his behaviors. What behaviors did that cause? You know, he stated not talking to family members, overthinking, staying in his bedroom, not wanting to associate, and crying. After we identified, okay, what's a negative thought, we moved in what is an alternative thought. I hesitate from using the term positive because that can kind of give the illusion of like everything is rosy and butterflies when that's not realistic with these kids and their experiences. So we just use the idea of an alternative thought, a different thought. A thought that could be more helpful. And so the thought that he identified was I was misunderstood. And the feelings that that created for him was this sense of reassurance, all over confidence, all over excitement that he didn't think as dark as he used to anymore. And he could notice that in his heart. And then how that impacted his behavior, he realized he started talking to his caregiver more often, and he was overall more outgoing and social. Muted, Dr. Martiga.
Sorry. All right, the trauma narrative. So the trauma narrative, I just want to begin by saying this is where the child is the author of their story. And this is where, at this point, that child is developing the story. And this is the way that they develop the story after some of the trauma work has been underground, laid as foundation. This is the meaning that they start to carry with them about the trauma that has occurred. The trauma narrative is the purpose of this is to increase the resilience and to empower that child, to empower not only that child, but to empower the experience of what they've been through. So how does this work? It allows the children to process the trauma in a safe way, in a safe and in a brave way, because we cannot guarantee safe, but we can guarantee brave, right? We can work with brave. And then helping them identify their perspective of themselves and the perspective of the world and how that has changed or altered in an empowering way for their empowering of their experience and of themselves. The trauma narrative, you're going to see examples of all the myriad ways that we have done trauma narratives. And we're going to go ahead and look at the next slide. The first one is the life story. And the life story for a complex trauma has 4 chapters. And this is for the kiddo that likes to write, that journals. Not every kid, this doesn't work with every kid. But for the first chapter, you begin, and it's very structured, just to give them a focus to move through the life story. First chapter is basic information and cool stuff about you. Second chapter is you begin with a memory that like really warms your heart. It's a special memory, and a person who is a superhero to you, or a hero of some way. And it could be a fictitious character or someone in history or someone in your life. The third chapter is things that have happened that have in your life that have impacted you, that have influenced you, that has made you who you are today. And this includes a trauma and adversity and any other type of experience that they want to identify. And the fourth chapter is about the future. Where do I go from here? How have I learned to cope? In what ways have I grown? And what has helped me heal? That's a huge one. What has helped me heal? Next slide.
These are a couple examples from my clients. The one on the left is a painting done by approximately 16-year-old. They were 16 transitioning to 17. And then the one on the left is done by a 9-year-old client. Both of these clients experience sexual abuse or some form of sexual violence. The painting, when they first came into therapy, they said, talking about it's easy. That's not the issue. It is this memory of this chair. That's what stuck. That's what I have stuck and I can't get past. So they started this painting, and if you notice, they didn't even finish the back. And that was like, when I see this memory, the chair is what I focus on. The background isn't really there anymore. So they painted the chair, they gave it the detail they remembered, and then that brought them into telling me a part of their story that they never had even said before. It was why that chair was such an important part of processing their trauma. And then the one on the left was a 9-year-old girl who created a trauma narrative that was divided into chapters, kind of like Dr. Martika talked about, but she really took the reins on the chapters for this one. So very small words, but I wanted to show you that she drew a little face to describe her feelings for each of each of the chapters. And the whole time, I think I'm a little choppy. Can you hear me again? Okay. The whole time, what I love is that she had her emotional support bearded dragon on her chest the entire time to keep her grounded. So remembering to put on those relaxation portions even while they're doing the trauma narrative. So this was the bad thing that blank did to us. And they wanted to just start with the bad thing that happened. Then they talked about the way they feel, and the way they feel in the moment, and then afterwards knowing that they can trust their parents to be a supportive advocate for them.
Bree, I want to add something here about the chair. If you go back and look at that green chair, that child, this is an example of externalization. So that child had a distance between themselves and the trauma, and using that chair was a way of helping them better focus on the healing process. That's externalization. Here we go. Here is a drawing. There's a lot in this. This is a drawing that a kiddo did in the classroom where he was being bullied, and he is the one in the yellow shirt in the center of the checkered rug on the ground. And so the bully, the person standing right above him, has taken away his book bag and is not giving it back. And then the classmates in the back, sitting at their desks, are cheering on the bully, the group think process. They're cheering on that bully. And the teacher in the corner, to your far right, at the desk with the blue book, is saying, "Oh, Lord." So that's the situation of just this helplessness among a whole group of people. Next slide, please. This is a writing that was done by a child who had been bullied. And I want to read it word for word because it's so beautifully articulated. Bullied into solitude. I am a victim of bullies. I am too tall. I am too big. I have phantom smells. I am different. I look wrong. I am not to be talked to, only about. I'm called vile things but not by my name. I cling to the few who go through the same trail as me. We try to remind each other we matter and we're more than what they say. We wait on the day peace comes. We are disappearing victims. Bullying is an equal opportunity ostracizer. It doesn't care about your race, religion, or wealth. Bullies are satisfied with the pains they cause and the cheers they gather. They never consider the scars they place on their victims' souls. Continuous tortures stick in a person like thousands of porcupine pricks and are impossible to remove without help. Daily, I see blind eyes, speak to deaf ears, listen to double-edged tongues, and wonder at hard hearts. Friends choose not to see, so they won't be seen as the next target. Classmates choose not to hear, so they don't suffer from a bully's words. Some quietly and carefully tell me it'll be okay when they are sure no one will hear them. Others just don't care as long as it doesn't affect them. What happened to the Good Samaritan? Where were you when my cries fell into silence? Next slide. We have with us a trauma therapist who loves gaming. And she has kids who also really enjoy gaming. And she said to this one child for their trauma narrative, she said, well, what if you could design a cover for your gaming, your game, and what would it look like on bullying? This was a fifth grader, and the client is right there at the center with the big round nose. There's client marked, and he is taken to school by his auntie, who's standing right next to him. The teacher is at the side of the school, and right out of the bus, see the bus to the far right, is the bully, and he drew the bully as a fire-breathing dragon who fires out mean words, and you also see like a punching glove there that's fired out, and the client is there trying to defend himself. Here's another trauma narrative using a video game engine. And what we have here is the bully is in a dungeon, and the dungeon, the child said, is detention. And the bully has friends. Those are the mushroom characters at the bottom. And they are all in detention, and the friends are mind controlled by the bully. Here we have a piece that was done by clay, with clay. And so this is sculpty clay, and it's very hard clay, and you have to really, really work the clay so that it becomes subtle and warm. And this client made a box, and actually what she was trying to do here is make a dice, and the top of the dice is open, and at the top of the dice there's like little pricks, little like sharp edges there. And so she was saying that I used the clay to make this box, and so all my pain that was closed up before therapy in a black box, no one could see it. But now after therapy, she still has the black box, but the top is open, and that she can get inside when she wants to pull out her emotions or pull out whatever she wants to say, and that her feelings are more open. But the box continues to be black so that no one can see inside, only from the top, and she's able to pull it out. And then she put dots around the box to make it look like a dice, because she said life is risky. It's like rolling dice. And then, oh yeah, I'm sorry.
It's okay. After the trauma narrative, we have in vivo mastery. And before we do this, we identify whether the kiddo really needs to do in vivo mastery. So what this is facing feared situations, objects, activities, or other triggers in a safe environment. The way I explain it to my kids is I am very afraid of spiders. Like, you will hear my scream a mile away. And say I walk into a garage and I see a spider, and I am just stunned and shocked, and I scream and run away. After that, I can never step foot in any garage ever again, whether it's my garage where the spider was, my parents, a boyfriend or girlfriend's garage. I can't go anywhere. But really, so I then fear garages. The garage is a harmless trauma reminder of the feared object that was the spider. So in vivo mastery, we're facing that garage that is a harmless reminder. So we're trying to reduce avoidance that will interfere with the child's daily life. Because imagine if their trauma reminder is like school when it comes to bullying, that is severely going to impact and interfere with their daily life. So some examples that we do that we'll go into next is a fear ladder, and then talking about the event, because with TFCBT, we do gradual exposure throughout the entire process. So here we have a fear ladder that I had a client do, and this is the client that painted the couch. her fear ladder involved a bunch of change in her environment. And so she identified that the lowest on her fear ladder or her staircase was driving. And at the top of her staircase or fear ladder was thoughts of her boyfriend leaving because she felt abandoned throughout this whole process. Um, and so she said that the environment, like the change in her environment, like going over to someone's house could be triggering. And then just growing up when it became, because she was about to graduate, and then her after high school plans. And then she thought about drugs and alcohol and how that can change her loved one's behavior and how they show their love to her and things like that.
So a big piece of the treatment as you start to get to the end of TFCBT treatment is the conjoint sessions. So having the kids get the ability to connect with their parents or their caregivers around the expression of their trauma narrative. So after they've created their trauma narrative, they get the opportunity to share it with their loved one and to bring that loved one into that experience with them. And so a big piece about how caregivers can show their support, that includes being open about their feelings with the therapist. So understandably so ahead of time, there could be a lot of anxiety that comes with the idea of your kid expressing this trauma narrative to you. So the therapist can do some background work beforehand with the parent to make sure that they are supported and regulated going into that conjoint session. We spend time validating that it's difficult to hear about a child's trauma. And again, just assuring the caregiver that they'll work together to make sure that they're prepared for that session. The caregivers get the chance to practice the parenting skills that were introduced in the very beginning. They've been doing that throughout the whole time, throughout the whole model. And again, it's just a matter of trying to really improve caregiver and child communication around the kids' experience and how they're learning to manage and heal from that. And the idea too is that once inevitably TFCBT treatment ends, right, you've got a kiddo and a caregiver that can still connect around these things if needed, because that caregiver can still use the skills and whatnot that were learned throughout the treatment to make sure that they're supporting their kid. And some examples of just ways to support include celebrating the kids' hard work throughout therapy and labeled praise and encouragement.
The very last portion of TFCBT involves enhancing safety. And really enhancing safety is also in the very beginning with psychoeducation. And so it's important that children know like the names of their body parts and how to communicate. So we're really enhancing safety in the beginning and all throughout the session, but at the end we're doing a big wrap up, and we might have to implement some extra things like creating a safety plan to help the kid and the caregivers feel safe. Go back over identifying their risks and triggers so they can feel more safe in their environment. Practicing those new skills. So like Ashley said, they can continue to take those throughout their life and with their communication with their caregivers and even teaching them to their siblings. They're learning how to set boundaries with family. Family should be like extra bolded, and friends, because it's so hard to set boundaries with family. Think about us as adults. It's still hard for us to set boundaries with family. So this teaches children and their parents safety skills they can use after their experience in TFCBT. Here's an example of a safety plan. And so this one talks about making the environment safe. So what can they do to make sure they are in a safe situation? So identifying risks and triggers. They're identifying warning signs, their ability to cope on their own, so their strategies with someone. So how the trusted adults that they could go to is in that part and in the tell someone section. And then we have our reasons for living. So that is a really big piece. And so we want to try to help them identify 4 or more ways, their reasons for living. And then if they need to seek emergency help, who can they call? All righty, so we have reached the end. Thank you for us going through this process with us and learning about TFCBT. our contact for services is Emily Locklear. She is the person who takes all of the intakes. She informs us on the intake she receives, and then we go through them, go through the referrals, and figure out which therapist is best suited and a good match for our referral. So if you need to contact Emily for services, or if you have referrals, there's her number and her email. I can always go back to the slide later too. Okay, so we did really good. We're at 12:47. Does anyone have any questions?
So let's take the slides down and see what questions people have. Thank you. Was
Okay,
there
I think
any?
I have a question. Sorry. I think I have a question. I know earlier you had mentioned the part where their services are done, for the child or the adolescent. Like what would they have to show like for you guys to be comfortable with services ending?
Are you asking what exactly like criteria the kiddo needs to
Mm-hmm.
meet in order to
Yes.
receive services?
Not to receive services, but
To
when you guys
end.
feel comfortable to end the services.
Gotcha. I think that there's never a set answer for this
Right.
because
Okay.
each client is different in what they need when it comes to TFCBT. And so if you're a student, you probably hate that answer. I hated that answer when I was in grad school. But really, that's why it's so important to build rapport with your clients and their caregivers, because you figure out what is the best time. Sometimes they end
Right.
TFCBT because they have processed the trauma and they're able to cope with everything that comes with the trauma. But then sometimes you have to move into a different form of therapy, whether it's PCIT for behavior or it's just psychotherapy for like other events that are going on. But I think my answer would be that it differs based on each child, but you want them to be able to have strong coping skills, have been able to process their trauma, and they have identified everything when it comes to enhancing safety, like trusted adults, identifying risks and triggers, etc.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and we're also looking at changes, and our program uses the RCADS, which is the Revised Children's Anxiety and Depression Scale, as well as the UCLA PTSD Reaction Index. And our kiddos get those when they first enter treatment, and then at the end of TFCBT, we would reassess and see where they're at, with symptoms wise with those, and make a decision according to that.
We have a question in the chat too. So this one says, what would you say is the range for the total time in TFCBT in our experience? So I'll say what it says in like what they say in the training, and then I'll let Dr. Martika and Ashley say what they think too. So in the training, they will usually tell you 8 to 12 sessions, which in my experience is not enough.
Not enough.
Yeah.
Not enough. So we're not bounded by insurance. So that's a tremendous benefit for VEEP and the families that we serve, the kiddos that we serve. I would say that I pretty much hold on to a client a year with a child. A year and a half.
And yeah, and to that point, I mean, the folks that are on our load have high levels of developmental trauma. So you're
That's
not
right.
looking at just one isolated experience of traumatization. You're looking at, a kid being embedded in some of these environments for years. So it can take a minute for sure.
So is it common for you guys to do like a referral like around that year mark? Like, for like she mentioned for like behavior or just psychotherapy?
I'm
Well,
not
we
sure
can
what
keep
you.
them after that because, like Dr. Martika said, we're not bound when it comes to like
No.
insurance, that we don't have to have a max number of sessions. And so our team is very diverse in the trainings that we have. And so like I do PCIT, so then I could take young kiddos from 2 to 7 when it comes to behavior issues Ashley does EMDR, Dr. Martika does internal family systems. And so we can keep it within, and like Emily does grief therapy, and we also do PSB. Like we have so much, and so we can keep that kiddo within VEEP.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just seeing, so we've got a couple of comments. Paul said the founders would say 8 to 12 sessions and 20 at the max. That's for TFCBT, but as Bree said, we have other modalities that we can use to troubleshoot if there's extra issues. Beth said, thank you for this training. This will be extremely helpful when talking to our parents about TFCBT for their children. Thank you for that, Beth. Let's see. The next question, are you receiving referrals from schools? There is so much fighting, just wondering what's going on with the kids. We receive referrals from schools. Yes. And then we've got, what is the session cadence typically? So are you talking
Cadence
about,
like
yeah,
rhythm? I'm not sure what the cadence is like
Like
rhythm.
monthly, once a month, or how
yeah,
often?
Weekly,
Yeah, we go
weekly.
weekly.
So, most all of us do weekly with a new referral, but depending on how the child's progressing, then we will lift off and do once every 2 weeks. And I have kids that I've been with for a year now, and sometimes I would do once every 3 weeks. Checking in, and I'm just gradually moving towards closure.
And I would like to add that the founders of TFCBT would say once a week is minimum. And they say, like, if you can, depending on the kiddo and their need, 2 times a week. But with most
We
clinicians' caseload,
can't.
you can't do that. That's not very like that's not really an option.
No. And one thing I'd like to add is that we offer home visits. We do telehealth. We do phone sessions. And then we have a few that come into the center here.
Any other
Other
questions?
questions?
Yeah, and of course we want to thank our funders, right? SAMHSA is a huge funder for us, and they are really the backbone behind just this wonderful work that we're able to provide to folks that are really underserved and might not be able to access it otherwise. Any other questions?
Well, if there's not any other questions, I want to thank the three of you. You've been doing amazing work with TFCBT and other trauma-focused modalities, which we'll get to in the spring. But I want to thank you for this presentation. Really appreciate all the insights that you've given us.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah.
Actually, we get a lot of the insights from the clients that we work from.
Yeah. They teach us.
Yeah. So really, this presentation was the sharing of, so we've done the training for TFCBT, but what you've seen is how it's what kids have done with this work, examples of it. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. Stay warm out there. North Carolina's getting chilly. And we look forward to having you at our next Lunch and Learn. Everyone's welcomed. And Paul, do you have the date for that?
We haven't said it yet. It'll be in January. We're taking the holidays off.
Okay, great. Happy holidays to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you. Dr. Paul,